Malo lele, kia ora, warm Pacific greetings. My name is Miss Lama, as Joe mentioned, and I'm privileged to be a project manager at Pacific Corporation Foundation. I want to start by acknowledging everyone who has taken the time out of their busy schedules to be a part of our webinar. It is our first one, so we are feeling the nerves, but more so excited that we get to share some of the work that we'll be doing at PCF. But before we start, in the true Pacific style, we're going to open up with a karakia, a prayer, which I will do. So, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te ātakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe mauri ora. All right, so just to give you all an overview of our day, we will go through some quick introductions. I'll explain what we will be covering today in our webinar. Our CEO, Joe, will be talking about the why behind this perception report. Angie, who you'll meet very soon, will talk about the cultural enrichment of the perception report. And then I will cover the connections and partnerships, as well as the future opportunities and the indications and findings from the perception report. Now, I do want to introduce our awesome team. Although it's a very small team, we are very loud and proud of PCF and the work that we produce. So I want to first start by introducing Angie Naidu-Khan, who is one of our project managers, as well as our executive administration. Then we have the amazing, young, energetic Arona Leanga-Mini, who is the Digital and Salesforce Officer at PCF. And then you're about to hear from the amazing CEO, Joanna Burke, who will speak more to our purpose for today's webinar. Just some quick, house rules or webinar house rules, if you want to call it that. Please, everyone, I need to relax myself, but please, this is just an open tala noa, a safe space for us to share. But if you feel like you want to ask a question, there is a chat box at the bottom sort of area of your Zoom that you can put a question in for us to be able to answer, hopefully, when we get to Q&A session near the end of our presentation. There is no silly or dumb question. All input is valued here. This webinar will be recorded, as Joe mentioned before, if you didn't hear her, and posted on our PCF YouTube channel that you'll be able to reference to later on. Please, if you can, follow our social media, so our Facebook, Insta, and LinkedIn, and also our website for New Zealand updates, as well as events that are coming up in the region, as well as in New Zealand and for PCF. So as I said before, this is our first webinar, so we will be having a questionnaire and evaluation type of poll at the end for you to contribute where you think we could improve in these webinars, but also make sure that it's relative and useful to the work that you're doing for communities. Now, enough from me. I'll be handing it over to Joe, our CEO. Thank you very much.
Malo everybody. My name is Joanna Burke, and I have been in the role as CE for the last 2 months. And one of my projects that I'm really keen to push out is this perceptions report and the findings in the report, but also how useful this report is for a lot of the work that we're doing in the region, but also here in Aotearoa New Zealand with both Pacific people, but also New Zealanders, understanding how we as Pacific people operate and why we operate and act the way we do. So a lot of you will be asking why this report, why this perceptions report? And I need to add a little bit of a historical context to this because PCF has been around since 2002, and PCF has played a vital role in strengthening Aotearoa New Zealand's relationship with the entire Pacific region. PCF, over its 21-year existence, has developed a lot of initiatives, including academic exchanges. They've developed schemes and have been quite instrumental in bringing seasonal workers to New Zealand, as well as advocating for economic development in the region. In the last couple of years, PCF has been through a transition, given that there are other agencies who are now advocating and executing activities in relation to earlier issues that PCF used to have an authority on. And today we have a new strategic focus. PCF today provides platforms for Pacific voices and expertise and partners to reimagine the Pacific narrative. We strengthen Aotearoa New Zealand's identity as a Pacific nation, and we also want to deepen the relationships that enrich the resilience, prosperity, and mana of our Pacific peoples. PCF is committed to advancing the government's Partnering for Resilience policy in the Pacific, and we also want to support our Pacific communities, both in Aotearoa New Zealand and in the region, to unlock their full potential. Given this time and the relationship of Aotearoa New Zealand with the Pacific and the frequency in which the Pacific keeps showing up in our current events, it is really important, and I think it's an opportune time and a great time and the right time for us to understand what New Zealanders really think about the Pacific and how we can use those insights to be able to inform discussion, debate, and policy decisions. So this perceptions report is modelled on the New Zealanders' perceptions of Asia and Asian peoples, and the Asia New Zealand Foundation initiated and has led their report for 25 years. So we've modelled what we've done on what they have done, and we worked with Kantar Public to execute both quantitative and qualitative focus groups, and 2,300 people from across Aotearoa from various backgrounds and ethnicities were surveyed. So both Angie and Melissa are going to uncover some of the statistics and interesting insights from the report. And I just want to say that at this point, it's actually a really important report. In the last, with some of the work that David Vaiafe was doing and also with the team, there are a few agencies out there who actually see the importance of this perceptions report and are incorporating it into their work. We've got academic institutions who are using it as part of their curriculum, and also some places of employment who actually see the richness of the insights and how they're using it to incorporate diversity into their workplaces. So without further ado, what I will ask here is I do have a poll to ask everyone. So I'm just going to bring that poll up just to help us break up things. So my poll is really, really simple. And it is, how many of you have seen or read the New Zealanders' perceptions of the Pacific report? So I'm just going to launch that. Okay, maybe it's not working. But anyway, we'll bring it up. There's another poll there that's asking people of how many of you have seen the report. If you haven't seen the report, as I said, there is a link to it, which is available off our website. But without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Angie, who's going to talk about the cultural enrichment that we get from the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Nisabula Vinaka, and good evening, everyone. Before I begin my presentation slide, I also had a quick poll, and let's see if my poll works or not. And it's also a very simple question, which is, how confident are you in your knowledge of the cultures of the Pacific? Let's see if this one works.
Sorry, Angie, our poll is not working, so you might just need to carry on without the poll.
Okay, sorry about that. So in my section, I will be highlighting on how the perceptions study captures cultural enrichment. It is important to understand the Pacific cultures, as New Zealand is made up of a diverse range of Pacific cultures. According to the Perceptions Report, most New Zealanders have limited knowledge of Pacific nations. 58% of the respondents had limited knowledge of Pacific nations, where 4% of survey respondents knew nothing at all about Pacific nations in comparison to 54% who knew a little bit. Also, the respondents were asked to write the first word that appeared in their mind when they see and hear the word Pacific. Islands is the most common word that comes to the mind, which is 25% of respondents thinking of this word, followed by ocean, which is 18% of the respondents. The other words were holiday, tourism, beach, tropical, neighbor, sunshine, community, nature, friendly culture, peaceful. For some, the first words that came to their minds were the name of a Pacific Island country, in particular, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Cook Island, New Zealand, and even Auckland. The report shows that perceptions of the Pacific for non-Pacific New Zealanders often only extend to seeing the Pacific as a tourist destination. In contrast, many Pacific New Zealanders see the Pacific Islands as much more than a tourist destination. For them, it is a place they call home, rich with history and culture. Moving on, the survey respondents were also asked to match a number of Pacific languages with the actual language itself. According to the report, the most recognizable language is Fijian. 3 in 4, which is 74% New Zealanders, correctly identify Bula as a greeting in Fijian. In contrast, Tuvaluan is the least recognizable, with only 5% of New Zealanders correctly identifying Whakatalofa Atu as a Tuvaluan greeting. Also, the survey respondents were asked to agree or disagree with a range of statements around both Pacific and Maori culture and the ways these cultures interact with each other. And the results showed that only 29% of New Zealanders feel that they have a good understanding of the Pacific cultures. In addition, only 38% actively disagree that Pacific cultures are all very similar. Also, over half of New Zealanders, which is 56%, think of Fiji Indians as Pacific people, compared to only 2% who think of them as Asians. And perhaps the most encouraging signal and further evidence of a desire for deeper connection is that over half of New Zealanders, which is 52%, agree that Pacific history should be taught as a part of New Zealand's history, compared to 19% who disagree. These insights in the perceptions report highlight that there is no doubt that New Zealanders want to learn about Pacific culture, and this can be achieved, and everyone has a role to play. Individuals can engage in cultural exchange programs, attend educational workshops, and support and learn from local Pacific businesses. Organizations can host Pacific-themed events, promote diversity and inclusion within their workplaces, and collaborate with Pacific communities. Government can allocate funding for cultural programs, facilitate international partnerships, and promote cross-cultural education in schools. The Perceptions Report gives us an important insight that it is essential we understand the cultural enrichment of the Pacific as it promotes diversity, fosters stronger regional relationships, and contributes to a more inclusive and interconnected global community. Thank you. That is from me, with highlights of responses around cultural enrichment in the Perceptions Report. I would now like to welcome Melissa Lama to continue with the rest of the presentation. Thank you. Pinaka Bakalepo.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie. So according to the report, New Zealand's knowledge of the Pacific outside of media and sport is relatively weak. Although participants in this survey strongly recognise the growth in Pacific leadership and its contribution from the Pacific. When participants were asked about their perception of New Zealand's connections to the Pacific, 42% stated they were not very connected, while 28% felt they were strongly connected, and 12% felt they were not connected at all. It's important to keep in mind that the variation in the level of connectedness depended upon one's linkage and lived experiences to the Pacific, including one's opportunity and accessibility to the culture. A positive indicator of the need to grow the connection is through the 52%, which is over half of the participants, agree that Pacific history needs to be taught in our schools, as mentioned by Angie, as part of the New Zealand history, in comparison to the 19% who disagreed. In regards to Pacific migrant workers, 56% agreed that Pacific migrant workers were of high value to our workforce in New Zealand. As much as New Zealand New Zealanders valued the contribution of Pacific migrants to our workforce. 44% still had concerns that Pacific migrants were being treated poorly. In some cases, amongst Pacific participants in the research, there was about 60% who were more concerned from our Pacific community. Opportunities for innovation was indicated at only 1 out of 10 people who indicated interest in relocating to the Pacific. Amongst young people, 16% were interested in relocating to the Pacific, and that's between the ages of 16 to 25 years old. But overall, Pacific participants in the survey, 22%, would seriously consider moving to the Pacific. In the qualitative data questions, participants gave examples on where employers were vocal about their lack of interest in hiring Pacific peoples due to their perceptions of Pacific peoples being too lazy or too cultured. And I think this is the beauty of the essence of the report, is that people gave, testimonies and examples of their experiences relative to the questions that were asked. Despite some of these perceptions, 91% of New Zealanders believed that it was somewhat important to have a connection with the Pacific for the purpose of supporting the developing countries, enhancing our current political, societal, and economic ties. But it's fair to say that New Zealanders overall are proud of the cultural ties with the Pacific. The growing young demographic in the Pacific and New Zealand have indicated in the survey their growing concerns of the effects that colonisation has had on their lives today and into the future. Although different demographics hold different perspectives, young people between the ages of 14 to 25, with 48%, believed it had a negative impact. As a side note, many young people over the ages of 16 felt they did not feel safe or confident to comment on this question. And I guess this could be taken as an indicator towards what more work needs to be done in our education system, as well as around, civics education. When asked what areas of their lives colonisation impacted directly in a negative way, the most common themes that were highlighted were culture, rights and freedoms, as well as education and career opportunities. Moving on to future opportunities. Data that was taken on sub-regions have been mentioned quite heavily throughout the report as expected. In regards to future opportunities, Micronesia came up as the least commonly known sub-region in the Pacific, with 46% indicating they knew nothing at all about Micronesia. In the qualitative discussions, it was highlighted that the word Micronesia does not come up as much as Polynesia and Melanesia. However, 49% of participants indicated they believed more education and knowledge needed to be shared about Micronesia and their close ties as a sub-region to Aotearoa. So more so, what are the impacts or influences directly that we receive in New Zealand from Micronesia? Geopolitically, when New Zealanders were asked about their knowledge of policies, projects or initiatives that impact the Pacific, over half of the participants, which was 56%, were aware of the Recognised Seasonal Employees Scheme, which we know as the REC scheme, of our Pacific employees who come to New Zealand and work in our horticulture and viticulture sectors. However, public awareness of the wider geopolitical state of the Pacific was low, with only 1 in 5 people being aware. In terms of words in the geopolitical terms, 74% have heard of Asia Pacific, 69% have heard of Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, and 54% had heard the term Indo-Fijian. In contrast to Moana Nui a Kiwa, only 14% had heard the term in relation to New Zealand. The growing tourism industry in the Pacific was well known amongst participants, as you would expect from New Zealand. 2/3 of New Zealanders, 64%, are interested in travelling to the Pacific, with 83% of those participants of people being of Pacific descent. 3 out of 5 participants, at 60%, are more interested in travelling to the Pacific before any other international country, with 25% indicating their interest in travelling to the Cook Islands, and unfortunately only 2% mentioning interest in travelling to Micronesian countries. In regards to concerns about travel to the Pacific, 7% of participants are uncertain of travelling to the Pacific due to COVID-19. And, the impact to travel that we had seen with all the policies around the world. And I guess that is due to the uncertainty that they have around the ability to be able to return back home. When we look at actors and what we consider as actors, these are people like us who can contribute to change, be the agents of change, as well as being in a position to partner alongside Pacific leaders and organisations who can work alongside you in areas that are mentioned in the perception report. One of those areas is climate change. In the Pacific, 72% of New Zealanders in the qualitative questions felt New Zealand could do more to help the climate issues in the Pacific, more around the coping mechanisms that are available. It was also highlighted that many participants are not aware of international efforts outside of New Zealand that support climate change in the Pacific. One indicator that was clear is that majority of participants believed New Zealand had a responsibility as neighbours to the Pacific Island countries to support climate change refugees. I guess one way in which we try to be agents of change and actors, if you want to call it that, at PCF, is through our recent research report into young people in the Pacific region, and more so asking questions around their life after climate change, after the growing concerns of, the natural disasters that have occurred in the Pacific, but also where in which we can position ourselves better to be of better support for young people that is more reflective of the future that they want to see for them in the next generation to come. Now we shall move on to impacts. I will pass this on to Joanna. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Melissa, and thanks, Angie, for that. I suppose for those of you who are sitting on this call, you're probably wondering, how can the findings in this perceptions report be used? And even though we've alluded to some of those, basically this provides a foundation. It provides a blueprint in opening up the discussions and talanoa around how do we help New Zealanders consider themselves to be Pacific, but also how do we enrich the lives of New Zealanders with what we know around Pacific and Pacific people. So, Arona, can we go to the next slide? Basically, we want you to use the report to influence and impact whatever it is you're doing. And the report demonstrates the potential to broaden the horizons of identity and inclusion. Looking ahead, it gives us an opportunity to understand our status in the Pacific region and examine how we can develop and enhance our unique identity as a Pacific nation. So for a lot of you who are on this call, we already know that. But how do we enhance that? How do we deepen our relationships, strengthen our identity, and amplify voice with the platforms that we have available at our disposal? Next slide. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Arona. This is here an opportunity for you to raise some questions and have the team answer them. We've already got some questions in here, so I'm going to go to the first question, and thank you for the question that you've put in the chat. And the question is, this may already be in the report, so apologies in advance. Can I ask what ethnicity classification was used in the report? Is it the one used by Stats New Zealand, and also was ethnicity data prioritised, or was it a total response? Anyone want to answer that? I'll answer it. Yes, the ethnicity classification is the one that's used in Stats New Zealand. It wasn't around ethnicity when we were asking the questions, but there was definitely ethnicity data. As you look at the report, there's New Zealanders who are non-Pacific, there are New Zealanders who identify as Pacific, and there was also Asian and other use in the report. So ethnicity data was prioritised, and as you go through the report, you can see that there are the rich insights that are provided are mainly from those who identify as Pacific. So I hope that answers your question. The second question, thank you, Ashkan, was how is the migration of Pacific Islanders to New Zealand influenced, or how has the migration influenced the cultural and social fabric of both the Pacific Islander communities and the broader New Zealand society, and how is this reflected in the report? Melissa, would you like to add some dialogue to this particular question?
Sure, Joe. In my, in our overview of the connectedness or the connectivity part or connection part of the report, obviously the main focus was seen of New Zealand's perception to the Pacific, but there were some indications on the want to explore opportunities in workforce development, to explore economic development through businesses, and seeing how they can bring some of our, resources and the way in which we have goods to sell in the Pacific into New Zealand. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that it was a big coverage in the report. It definitely wasn't. But from a New Zealand-born Tongan who lives here in Christchurch, born in Auckland, I would say that the contribution has been well known in the areas of sport, and you will actually find that in the section of the report that talks about public figures and their contributions to the Pacific, who some of them are Pacific-born rugby players, actors, and just how much it's enhanced our visibility. Although we don't want to be known as just people who enhance culture through sport, even though that's fantastic because we are talented in that space, we do want to see more of our traditions and our cultural values and our languages being more embraced in New Zealand society today. So apologies if that doesn't answer your question as much as what you would like, but happy to have further discussions on how we could capture that more to contribute to whatever work you're doing.
Thanks, Melissa. And just to add to that further discussion, I suppose the report does highlight that the Pacific has contributed a lot to the fabric of New Zealand society. There are those who say that, the Pacific Islanders do bring a lot to the landscape of New Zealand. We know that from work ethics, but also through culture, and what we're seeing today with other ministries like the Ministry of Pacific Peoples, language, and promoting our languages through schools and also in communities is a way of showing how much the Pacific does contribute to our cultural and social fabric. So there are a number of ways. All you need to do is go out to places like, in the South Island, where you see a large concentration of Pacific peoples, and they're doing their own bit to uphold their culture and their language and some of the rituals, through church and community events. So that's adding to the richness, and it is visible. And with social media today, we are seeing a lot more of that, which is great. And yes, the report doesn't really delve into it in detail, but it does tell us that, they do value that. And non-Pacific people do see that. They want to mix and mingle. They want to learn more about the Pacific people, but also the cultures that they bring, and also the ethics that they bring, especially in the workplace, and as Melissa alluded to, in the sports and also in entertainment. So that's just my addition to that. Angie or Arona, do you want to add to that comment at all?
But I would say, Joe, as something to note as well is the changing profile of the future workforce here in New Zealand. And with some of the statistics that we've read out today doesn't clearly define that, but throughout the report, you can see with the young demographic of New Zealanders who are coming here for, through the RSE program and through other workforce visa opportunities, the contribution really for the workforce that they need to prepare for, that the perception study really feeds into, is how prepared are they to create that space that is going to be a brown workforce in the near future and the futures to come. So yeah, as a side note.
Right. Thank you. And I suppose, go Angie.
I just wanted to say Moses Alatini has a question in our chat box, and I think both you and Melissa, whatever you were talking about, the values that Pacific people bring to New Zealand, that was the question. So in case Moses was awaiting for an answer, and I think you have answered it correctly, Joe and Melissa.
Okay, thank you. And then just to add to that, there's another question that Ash Khan has raised. Thanks, Ash. You're keeping us busy on the Q&A this evening. In what ways can this report contribute to enhancing cultural inclusion for Pacific Islanders within the workplace? A lot, actually, because I think the report tells us that non-Pacific people really want to learn and understand the culture. They want to understand, the language in the workplace. They are open. And workplaces, employers actually need to use this report and because it's saying to them, you need to make the environment in which your workers are in every day conducive to diversity and allow the conversation. You've got to provide the space, you've got to provide the time, and it actually stems from the top. So if you're a business owner or you're an employer, you actually need to develop that trust amongst your workers so that they're able to share their cultures and bring their cultures to the workplace. But actually, the reality is a lot of our employers do that. We just need to do it more, especially for those industries where our Pacific people probably aren't thriving as much and they're probably just seen as labor. And I'm not going to pinpoint some industries where we know that this is happening, but they create their own subgroups within the workplace. And within these subgroups, we need to make sure that there's inclusion, collaboration, and that we're fostering that environment. And PCF can help employers with developing these environments to allow for our people to actually share their differences and their cultural experiences with non-Pacific. So the report says it there that we need to foster these to allow these to happen. Does anyone else want to add to that dialogue, Melissa?
Yeah,
Angie?
I think I just want to give an example. We had 2 weeks ago, we had a tertiary students conference for New Zealand Tongan tertiary students. We had 148 students from across New Zealand who came along, and some of the feedback, one of the debates competition topics was just how reflective is the perception study. So they were told to go away and research the report and come back with their thoughts and debate on whether the perception study was reflective of how they view Aotearoa and the Pacific. And some of the comments that came back after the debate was they loved how the findings can be industry specific, meaning it could be at a policy level, but also be at a service delivery level for anyone who works in the health sector, education, youth mentors, because there is ethnic specific data there, as well as testimonies from people that sort of support and give context to what the findings were. And yes, it sounds a little bit biased because I work at PCF, but I think the one thing that is really good is that there is no room for sort of excuses around how they can be more accessible in terms of, data specific to ethnic communities in the Pacific. And, that's the amazing work of, past, directors that we have like David, thank you, David, for your thinking and being able to ensure that we had this data available for our young people, and just to get their reflections on it was really rich for us. Yeah.
Anyone else? Cool. Our next question, thank you, David, is how do the findings of this report help shape Aotearoa's future Pacific policy engagement at a political level? And funny that you asked that, David, because we had a big discussion about this on Friday as a team, because one of the questions that we were expecting was, it's great we got this perceptions report, but how is it going to shape what's being done at government and also in a political level? And one of the things that came up was, I think one of the statistics that Angie raised was around how people see the Pacific. Non-Pacific people see the Pacific as a tourist destination, and Pacifica who live and born and raised in New Zealand see the Pacific as their home, as somewhere that's rich and steeped in tradition and culture. What is that telling us? When we're doing policy and we're looking at engaging at a political level, Pacific people know how to do it the Pacific way. We understand our people. We understand how our people think. There's that VAR that when you're working at a policy level, you don't always have if you're having non-policy people trying to put together programs or policies for our people. This is telling us that we have the leadership, we have the skills, and we have the experience to be able to be in those jobs and be in leadership jobs to actually help shape the future for our people and for ourselves as well. So it's about highlighting Pacific people, Pacific excellence, Pacific leadership to go into these roles and help shape the future of Aotearoa New Zealand, and also engagement at both a political as well as a cultural level. So I'm sure both Angie and Melissa have dialogue to add to this.
No, I definitely think you covered that pretty well. And, there's so much of the perception report that we could probably pull out. But I think the impact comes from people having a look at it themselves, and definitely reading some of the comments that come along with the data. So, no, you covered that well, Joe. Well done.
Yes, Joyce, I think I have mentioned in my slide that our policies need to be made around the Pacific, taking into consideration that there's a lot of skill set and knowledge among the Pacific people. And that is where the government, at political level, we cannot just turn a blind eye and always have things happening in the Pacific where we send somebody who knows nothing about the Pacific. So we have got the non-Pacific New Zealanders and we have the Pacific New Zealanders. So there is a lot of enriched knowledge among the Pacific New Zealanders, and we have to make use of that. And that is what the perceptions report is actually saying.
Great. Thank you, ladies. We have another question here. There is also a need to have more networking groups that help our Pacific brothers and sisters in whānau that also branches out to health literacy, positive lifestyles and employee sectors. It would be good to get this report and use this data to create awareness. 100%. And this is one of the reasons why PCF has launched this webinar series, is that we need to get this report out to everybody who can see the benefits of the insights in here. And, health, education, employment, everyone should be using this, but also personally, going into youth groups or community groups, because here the report and the findings are saying that what we're doing is actually enriching of New Zealand and also the region. So thank you for that, and be great to have you all attend the rest of our webinars where we unpack different aspects of the perceptions report and how it applies to different groups today. So I'll touch on that towards the end of this webinar. So I hope that answers that question or that comment. Ashkan, how do you plan to leverage this report to enhance the political, cultural and daily life experiences of Pacific Islander communities? And I think I just answered that question in the previous question, which is around, we're starting this webinar series as a start. We're also going to do some in-person workshops, which we're going to invite people to attend. Not so much workshops, but more think tanks to see what insights we want to reimagine. What does Aotearoa New Zealand look like if everyone sees themselves as Pacific Islanders, and how rich would the landscape be when we're talking about these things? Because I think there's almost like this fear out there that people don't want to talk about it, because there are a lot of New Zealanders who don't see themselves as being Pacific or being part of or being a Pacific Islander or a Pacifica person. So we're going to go out, we're going to socialize this report, share it with everybody, go up and down the country, but also make sure that at policy and government and political level, they're actually taking the findings seriously. So one of the things we want to push as a team is how do we influence the levers in government with this information? Hope that answers your question, Ashkan. Any more other questions? I'm conscious it's dinner time for a lot of you, and we've already taken up 45 minutes of your time. So no more questions, team? No? Should we move on to the next slide, Arona? What have we got? Oh, hang on. Thank you. So as we're carrying on that trajectory of what we're doing with our webinar, our socialization of the report, we do have our upcoming webinar series on Thursday, the 25th of October. You can register at our website. Here is this will be a great webinar because we start to look at what the findings in the perceptions report, but also the youth research that Melissa and the team did. I'll get her to talk about that briefly following this, but jump onto the webinar series. It'll be a great opportunity for you to listen to some youth leaders from around the region, as well as Melissa, and how they're going to be using the perceptions report to carry on the work and amplify the work that they're doing with youth around economic development, around health, and a whole some other issues around climate change as well. So please do hop onto our website and get that information. Melissa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. As much as I love this webinar, the webinar too is the one that I'm really excited for, simply because the three panelists that we have here were also people who were interviewed alongside their respective organisations that they represent in New Zealand and in the Pacific. And we were so fortunate to be a part of a Pacific Youth Governance Conference in Auckland last year, where we got to talk to youth leaders from Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, all 9 provinces, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Samoa. We had some from Cook Islands. Although we'd love to have covered the whole Pacific region and have representatives from each country, we did manage to still get a good number. And so, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, we talked about what is life looking like for our young people in the organisations and in the communities post-COVID, but also the natural disasters that have occurred around the Pacific, but also how they work together to try and build their own voice, to amplify their own voice. Because one thing that has happened really well, that's always happened in the Pacific with young people, is that they do mobilise, whether they have resource or not, although mobilisation can look different for every country. One thing they've mentioned is they've realised that they want to work closely together as a Pacific region, and that also includes us here in New Zealand. So that was such a privilege to be able to do this research and connect with these young people. And so the three of them will come back and share, what's been happening since then, some of their own individual journeys to represent their countries overseas, but also what their future plans are and how they plan to work in with New Zealand Youth, Pacific Corporation Foundation, but also how all of us can also do our best to be good allies and buffers, I reckon, for young people. So yeah, please come along. I don't want to give away too much here. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Does anyone else on the team have any parting words before we wrap this up and we have a poll? So you'll see on your screen a poll that comes up. If you can answer that, we'll give you a minute. And while you're filling it, for those of you who have fast fingers, there's another third webinar which will look at labour mobility and career opportunities, and what the perceptions report, how that's shaping some of the work that's being done in those areas from a youth perspective, but also from those who are coming to New Zealand for better opportunities. And then what we'll also be doing on Thursday, the 16th of November, is we're going to have our very first think tank. So if you're interested in being a part of the think tank, we invite you to send us an email or message us and let us know if you'd like to be a part of it. But basically, we're just bringing people together to unpack again the findings in this perceptions report and how it will shape what we look at for the next year, whether or not we do another perceptions report and ask New Zealanders, or is there another aspect of the perceptions from the Pacific or of New Zealanders that we should be looking at? So thank you everyone for answering that poll. It's great to see that some of you knew some of the insights that were in this presentation. But before you all leave and go and have your dinner, we just have one more poll to ask you, which is... Be quick. So there you are. There's a poll. How much more confident are you of the insights in the perception study? And the last but not least is, how useful was this webinar for you? These are all anonymous. We don't know who is answering these, but we value your feedback because it just helps us to look at how we can make this better. And also if whether it is very, very useful for you. So have a question there. Pitika, you can send us an email to info@pcf.org.nz. So info@pcf.org.nz or the think tank registrations. But we will put up a link on our website before the end of the week for those who are really interested in coming to that. So that's my part. Melissa, I hand it over to you.
Yes. Now, as the self-appointed person who's doing the prayer for today, which I do not mind, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining again. Hopefully you can join us on our next webinars that we have coming up. But I will end us with a karakia. So just a karakia whakamutinga. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o te tātou āriki ai hukaraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga teitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake, 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 amene.
Amen.
Malo, everybody. Thank you once again for being here with us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Enjoy your dinner.
Thank you, everyone.